And to talk a bit more about America's fentanyl crisis, I'm really pleased now to be joined on the programme by Vanda Felbab-Brown, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Thank you very much indeed for finding the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. It's a very important issue.
So it is an important issue indeed, because fentanyl kills about 70,000 Americans every year. It's now the leading cause of death among American adults under the age of 45. This is a public health crisis, isn't it? So just first of all, give us a little of the historical context and explain how the situation has got this bad.
Well, it is an enormous public health crisis. It is the most lethal epidemic ever in the world's history. And it's not just confined to the United States. Canada is grappling with similar devastation, and fentanyl use is devastatingly spreading in Mexico. The crisis originated in the 1990s with U.S. pharmaceutical companies, but most notably, notoriously, Purdue Company, getting the U.S. population hooked on opioids. Those were different opioids, prescription opioids like Oxycontin, that the pharma companies claimed were not addictive, which turned out to be vastly incorrect. In about 2013, Chinese suppliers started providing to the U.S. Illegal market and synthetic opioid, fentanyl, by far the most powerful drug that entered the market. Since then, we have seen many analogs that are even more powerful than fentanyl. And fentanyl and synthetic opioids have been really a game changer for traffickers. And as China changed its regulations, Mexican traffickers are now the leading suppliers.
Right. Well, let's talk then a bit about the geopolitics of this. You mentioned both China and Mexico. That's where these drugs are being produced and then transported into the United States in the most part. What can be done at a political level to try and clamp down on that movement of drugs? Is the US doing enough right now to cooperate with Beijing, to cooperate with New Mexico?
Well, so China is still the principal source of the precursor chemicals, many of which are legal, that are then shipped often knowingly, complicitly to the Sinaloa cartel and Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación in Mexico that make fentanyl and then smuggle it into the United States. So the United States is certainly very keen to cooperate with both China and Mexico meaningfully to reduce supply. Unfortunately, we are not in that state. Both China and Mexico really pulled back, sabotaged, hollowed out cooperation for different reasons. China, because it subordinates its law enforcement cooperation to its geostrategic relations. And as the United States and China find itself in the most tense geostrategic relations, perhaps Cold War, China pulled back from law enforcement cooperation. And we really have been at essentially zero. In the last weeks, we are seeing some overtures from China to try to perhaps start cooperating somewhat. In Mexico, the López Obrador administration also hollowed out, decimated cooperation. President López Obrador does not like the United States to be aware and exposed to the collapse of law enforcement in Mexico. He has also pulled back from confronting the cartels. And through a series of incidents, we have found ourselves essentially in Mexico being in denial overall. Again, just in the last few days, we are seeing somewhat of a reverse on the part of the Mexican government. For the first time in some months, Mexico is now saying they are interdicting some fentanyl flows. There is more of a recognition, official recognition in Mexico, that its criminal groups play a critical role. But again, the level of cooperation is inadequate.
OK, so there still needs to be more work done on the international level. But what about the fentanyl that is making it to the United States? What should the US government and US states be doing now to try and stop its illegal sale? I know different states are trying different things. Virginia, for example, has labelled fentanyl a weapon of terrorism, meaning it can receive harsher prison sentences for those that deal it. Is that a good idea, for example?
Well, I think there is a good reason to think about the complicitness of dealers that often, without telling their users, mix in fentanyl. So one of the huge problems with fentanyl is that it's mixed into everything, not just other opiates, but also fentanyl, cocaine, but also methamphetamine, cocaine, other drugs. So kids at school who start experimenting with drugs often end up being exposed immediately to lethal dose of fentanyl as they are first trying to experiment with drugs. Established users might want to be sourcing methamphetamine and end up with a mixture of fentanyl that kills them. But law enforcement is not the only tool, and the Biden administration, and I would say the United States overall in recent years, has learned a tremendous amount. The Biden administration is critically emphasizing treatment and harm reduction. This has been happening at state levels, and it's now a trend across several administrations. Enabling access to treatment, which in the United States is still available to only 13% of people who seek it out.
So is it fair to say then, forgive me for cutting across you, that America doesn't need just a war on drugs approach here, but it also needs a sort of human understanding that this is an addictive drug and that medication needs to be provided for people as well?
Well, absolutely. And, United States has long moved past the caricature of the war on drugs, simply stopping supply in a very narrow sense being the operating policy. This is not what the Biden administration's policy is about, and frankly hasn't been the policy even previously. There is the Biden administration for the first time put the language of harm reduction, such as distribution Narcan, into its strategy. So, in fact, I would say that the bulk of effort, or very significant effort of the Biden administration, has gone into treatment, harm reduction, and expanding access to public health. But the crisis is enormous, and it's not going to stay contained to the United States and North America. It's no longer contained to North America, to the United States. It is going to come to other parts of the world, including Western Europe.
It's really interesting thoughts. Thank you very much indeed. Vanda Felbab-Brown talking to us there from the Brookings Institute. We appreciate your time and your analysis today. Now in other news.